special guest, Mr. Steen. Mr. Steen is a Norwegian writer who has published a wide range of novels, plays, and collections of poems, books of short stories, children's books, and essays. His work has been translated into 26 languages and published in 46 countries. So, it is with my great pleasure that we welcome him to the Home for Cooperation. I would also like to remind you that our evening program will start at 7 o'clock with a live Skype connection with Paly, which I assure you don't want to miss. And at 9 o'clock, a live concert will follow here outside the cafe area. I would like to take also this opportunity to thank the House of Literature in Oslo and Norway Grants for their support for bringing Saladin Days here to Cyprus to the Home for Cooperation. I hope you enjoy your day here at the Home for Cooperation. Thank you very much.
Well, I will not use a microphone. I really appreciate if you interrupt me when I'm talking, because this is a breakfast talk. And I'm sure that the audience also will help me with finding words when I do not find the correct English word. That I will ask you to help me to find the right word. So this is your job. They are listening and you are asking and you are helping me. That's what I want from you. So first I will start with answering the question which we already have heard. Why did not Shakespeare write any play about Richard the Lionheart? And I can answer on this question on behalf of Paly and myself, because we have discussed this a lot for years. And our common mean about this is that, or common opinion of this is that Shakespeare always wrote about persons, kings, which had some weaker side, some better side. They were complex people, persons. But it was not interesting to write about Richard, because he was totally perfect. He had no bad side. He had been he was a one-dimension hero. And a one-dimension hero is not interesting to write about. All of us still want to see Shakespeare's plays on film or theater, because we can follow a development in the person. And but about Richard, it's no bad sides at all, or characters in him. This is the way I was grown up myself. It's the same Sir Walter Scott, the author, the Scottish author, who wrote Ivanhoe in 1819. So this is the character of Richard in Ivanhoe, and the story I have been told in my childhood, and even mostly at the universities. My background at the university is that I studied history and philosophy and the history of ideas. But never I've read or heard anything about things I'm going to try to tell you about. Well, that's the answer on the question, and I think that when we are going through this hour, I hope I have told you some news about Richard. But he is one of the best examples of uses and misuses of history writing. Some of you saw the theater play some days ago, the play which Paly and I have written, The Desert Storms in English. In the end, you saw that his mother, Eleonora of Aquitaine, was preparing how to act after her son had died. From my point of view, Richard is one of the most eclatant examples of how he misuses history and starts a propaganda about the person. And the main actors in that play, how to build Richard as the person as I have grown up with, is his mother, Eleonora of Aquitaine, Queen of Aquitaine, the western parts of France, that's Aquitaine, and the Archbishop of Canterbury at this time. They are the most important persons to build Richard as the hero, the one-dimension hero, which was not interesting for a Shakespeare to write theater plays on. Well, I will. Do I speak loud enough? Is it easy to understand what I say?
Yes.
Perfect. Then we go further. I will try to answer on one question, and that is, who was Richard the First? I must. There are some wonderful kids here. It's not your own head which are talking; it's the kids. Yeah. First of all, Richard is born in Oxford in 1157. You must remember that Richard is like us, children of the Crusades. In 1099, the Crusaders has taken Jerusalem, and they have killed all the Jews and all the Muslims in Jerusalem, and even the Christian minorities. For example, like the Coptic Church, the Armenian Church representatives, they are killed or they have fled. Because the Crusaders from Europe, even very often from England, Belgium, France, Germany, which is the states we have today, from these areas, they thought that a believer, a Christian, had to have this color in the face like I have. An absolutely white person, with some brown elements, even some red elements, and blue eyes or green eyes. That was a Christian. So when I guess that some of the from the Coptic Church in Ethiopia would say something like, I have a cross here, and I'm okay, I'm black, but I'm a Christian. I don't think you had any big chance to survive this meeting with the Crusaders. This fact is that the Jews and the Muslims were massacred in Jerusalem in 1099. And just only these facts, if people in the Western Europe had understood exactly this point, I guess that some of us has acted in another way in the Middle East. For example, after the Second World War, if we had had this in common. Because the old Jews, the old Muslims, remembers this story or this history facts, as I'm telling you. Well, it's in this area, this period of the world's history, Richard is growing up. And he is a very typical example. He is son of Henri. You heard I was explaining this in French way. Henri is French. His mother, Eleonora, is French. They are Normannians, and they are speaking only French in the court in Oxford. And my childhood hero, Richard, never learned a single word of English. He always speak French. Shocking news for a young Thorvaldsten to grow up with, but okay. He was the third of 5 sons, and he had 3 sisters. He had 2 extremely intelligent half-sisters living back in France. One of them is Marie de Champagne, the first French novelist, the founder of the letter novels, and was extremely intellectual, his half-sisters living back in France. His mother, Eleonora, is a person which I have heard nearly nothing about. And that's in itself shocking news in itself. Eleonora is probably one of the strongest royal persons in all ways of the word strong we ever have had in Europe. And especially after, I would say, after year 1000, year 1000. Who is she? She's very well educated. She is very interested in poetry. She has 2 daughters from before with the French King Louis, and she participated in the Second Crusade. And she participated really. She was fighting with sword, she was using the arrow, and when she lost the sword on the ground in the Holy Land, she would fight with her hands. She was really a fighter. And still, absolutely, and intellectual. And she loved poetry and troubadour poetry especially. This is Eleonora. And she was also strong in that way that she thought that her first man, her first husband, Louis of France, who she married, that she thought that he was too soft and a too weak person, and she was not very much impressed that her first husband ran into the tent when the fight starts at the battlefield. When she were fighting, her husband, the French king, went into the tent and was protected by his own soldiers. So they divorced, and she went to London, and she married to Henri, who became the king of whole England. But he was not king then, he was a duke, and he became later king of England. And it's also one more thing to mention, I think we can have. I think she was about 34 years old when she married to the soon coming king of England. He was 24 at this time. Yes? Speaking, please, you must be very loud.
I was wondering, so this story about Louis hiding in the tent, what are the sources? Are they contemporary? Are they maybe somebody who was like English pouring scorn on or wanting to sort of denigrate Louis maybe, or somebody?
Yeah. I think most of the things I will talk about, I think if I shall recommend a very important historian, who wrote extremely good things about these things, who has been is the American historian Stephen Runciman, which has made 3 volumes called The Crusaders. And these 3 novels, from my opinion, they are still the best thing written about this thing. And he uses a lot of resources or sources from the Arabic world, but mostly from the different crusades. It's a lot of historians from French side, from Austrian side, from English side, even them is making to fulfill this picture. So this story is well known, for example, for French historians. And this also brings me into a very important dimension with the picture I'm trying to describe in the play together with Tariq, and also I have done in 2 novels, and that's the new resources I have worked with. I find resources, one sort of resources in England, some totally different in France. Richard in England and Richard in France is a totally different picture. And it's also very different differences between the Shia sources and the Sunni sources. Very big, we will come to this. And to old Jewish history, it's also important difference. Very and totally different from what I had expected. We will come back to this. Because I have mentioned the 2 parents of Richard, Henri and his mother Eleanor. You have already heard that she is a fighter. She is an intellectual. She is also very interested in poetry. She has a lot of dimensions, different dimensions in her character. But who is his father? Henri. He is not clever in riding a horse. He is not interested in fighting with a sword. He is not a fighter at all. He is not interested in wrestling like his wife. She is very interested in wrestling. And young Richard learns everything from his mother. Even to swim he learned from his mother. And it was not ordinary to... Not all people was trained in swimming at that time. Well, his father is much more interested in building up the trade, the commerce, and he is also one of the most important for developing the harbors, not only in England but also in Great Britain. And he is also very important for establishing new laws, new Magna Carta, also the other things which is called laws in the civil society, and everything which is the start of the modern state. The modern state of England is Henri very important to establish and to support. In this work, in this establishing, he cooperates with all who are interested in this. And those who are interested in this is, for example, a very strong Jewish society at that time in London, which are very important for the commercial dimensions in building up England. Eleonora, she hates this. She's against it. She wants, as I have told you, the Crusaders had already taken Jerusalem. They had occupied a lot of the Middle East and a lot of North Africa. And she wants to support the part of the leadership in Europe. It's royal persons, it's dukes and others who wants to develop, expand expand these areas. That's what Eleonora of Aquitaine goes for. She wants to support a new coming crusade to develop, to expand this area as much as possible. That's her political dimension. And of her 8 children in London, it's only one who supports her, and that's her very nice son, Richard, my hero from my childhood. And this conflict in the family, the conflict between Richard's father and mother, is so deep and so intense that mother and father did not divorce officially, but unofficially. And mother takes the son, Richard, with her when he is about, we don't know exact, but 10 or 12 years old, to France, to the northern parts of France, and stay there mostly rest of her life. And most of the time, Richard is after this, he's coming back to England one time. And that's after many years. And after this episode, he is in England for 1.5 years, maximum 1.5 years. So this is the story about the English. Well, we have come to the period that he is 12, 14 years old. You can take it easy. We will not use half an hour on every year. I will try to do this a little bit short. But I think it's most important for you to recognize or learn, if you haven't heard this before, is that from he is 12 years old, he starts to work as a general. General, you heard correct. He has an army. He is the head of an army. And this army is operating in France. And in 3 very big battles, he is defeating some divisions of the army, which is led not physically but politically by his father, Henri of France, or of England, who wants to have the control of his son. So if some of you have some problems with your children, how to educate them and develop them, I think you need this inspiration to know that some has more problems than you have had. First of all, it's family conflict. I would say it's rather big. Some want to go to fulfill more, start a 3rd crusade, and some want not to do this. This is a very complex family situation. Great. Okay.
Sorry, I thought you were going to say make them into generals.
Yeah.
There is an army against them.
Yeah. Maybe sometimes that can be the wise way to come out of this. Well, these clashes between father and mother and the father and the mother and son is increasing. And but the reputation of Richard when he is about 19 years old is enormous. It's already well known that young Richard is already a well-trained soldier and officer, and that he is an extremely important person in the future. I guess that already the popes see him as a big talent for a future crusade. And I am absolutely sure that his mother has several times mentioned this point for the Pope, because she is one of the really biggest fan of the Pope and one of the biggest believers in that dimension, in this way. Well, when we have come to this year when we go a little jump now. We come to the year when Richard has had the shocking news from Jerusalem from 1187. The shocking news for the Pope, for Eleonora and for Richard is that Saladin Ayyubi, the Sultan of Egypt and Syria, has won the battle outside Hattin, close to the Tiberia Lake, and that he is a commander of an army, not only with Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims, but also the Jews and a lot of Christian minorities, which I do not believe that Richard or Eleonora know the name about, for example, the Coptic Church.
Yeah, sorry. There's also one dimension that hasn't been mentioned, you haven't mentioned so far, which is the Byzantine state, which they also were in the area, and the Byzantines, which are also in the area, which also see sometimes, and I'm not sure if it was Richard or other crusaders, they feel it quite negatively as well.
I will absolutely come back to this.
Yeah,
Absolutely, I promise you. The Byzantine point is enormous and very, very under-communicated in this world. I've written a novel called Constantinople about this. We'll come back to this. And I was just mentioning that at this period, in this period, it's the shocking news is that, first of all, when this army is coming, when the news is coming to Rome, to England, to France, about Saladin's victory. This is the shock for the Pope and for Eleanor and for Richard. It's not that they lost at the battlefield at Hattin. The shock is that Jerusalem is now open for all, and they will call them the infidels, the non-believers, the unbelievers. So the shock is for them that the Muslims and the Jews and the Christians, all the Christians, not only the correct Christian, but all so-called Christians can pray in the holy city. And that's the shocking news for the Pope in Rome, Gregorius VIII, and his speech after this news is very well documented. I will take a little. It's of course in Latin, but I've got a short translation into English. Show no mercy to the infidels. The more unbelievers you kill, the shorter your journey to heaven will be. Bring Saladin's head to Rome, and I will reward you with the keys of the kingdom of heaven. It's very enormous perspectives. And I can tell you this, this was not metaphoric. This was very concrete. And it's really a dimension when we have all the children outside here. But to kill a child is as much worth as if you kill a person on my age. As more you kill, that's better. This dimension is totally concrete, and it's catastrophic for the world we live in today, because it was a lot who was killed. It was many hundreds, millions who was killed for many hundred years. This is not one pope who is mad. This is the same the popes were saying from 1095, when the crusade started by Pope II, the Pope Urban II, in 1099. And we shall take this afterwards, so I hope that this crusade started from then, and now I'm saying the year is 1187. So, well, Richard, yes, I support the Pope. I will take the cross. I will do whatever the Pope means is correct in these questions. I guess that his father is nervous about this. He don't like this because he wants to have the commerce, the development of England and Great Britain to be in England. This will be a difficult political situation in France, in England. But the king in France at this moment, Philip, a close friend of Richard, is supporting absolutely the Pope. They will take the cross together. They will establish the Third Crusade, and especially after the Frederick of Barbarossa died. Then it's no doubt it has to be Richard who shall lead the Third Crusade towards Jerusalem and free Jerusalem from the unbelievers or from the infidels. So, if we now try to see this in your head, Richard is crowned to King of England in 12th of September 1189. Yes, 89. 1189, the 12th of September. He is crowned in Westminster Abbey, and outside Westminster Abbey, the massacre on the Jews starts. I must admit, I had never heard about this till for 10, 15 years ago. But I never heard about this in the school books and in the university. And those three of his father's closest friends, which were Jews, were killed in this massacre when Richard the same time was in Westminster. Some of the Jews managed to fled to York. They were killed, most of them, but some of them fled from there, found ships, and went to Europe. It was no place in Europe to hide. Some managed to hide some places in France, but that was for a short time. Most of them fled where? They fled to the Middle East, to the area where Saladin controlled, or they had heard was controlled. Some of them fled to some areas in Spain, but that was also very unsafe. So they had to fled to some parts in the Middle East, which were under control of Saladin Ayyub. In the year, we are now coming to the year when the Crusaders from the north are coming down south. We are 1191. They go from England, from France, they go through Europe, through Germany, Belgium, Austria, they go to Italy, to the harbor of Messina. And it's a huge army, enormous. Some has already come down to the Holy Land and have started the fight, but an enormous army, Armada, is in Messina, led by Richard. They go further to Cyprus, to Limassol, the nice sunny place, city is Limassol. And it's about 257 ships. And at this time, they stop. wait a little because they were waiting on some parts from the French Armada. They are waiting on some of the states in Italy to participate in this enormous armada led by Richard. But they stop here in Limassol, and at that time Richard is not married. But he thought that he should marry Alice, a French princess. And they met, and maybe they thought they both should marry to each other, but I'm not sure about this. But the one thing we absolutely are sure about is that his mother, Eleonora, suddenly comes with her own ship from England, where, of course, she has 3 or 4 more ships in her little fleet, and they come to Limassol. And on board she has also an other princess, a very beautiful lady with black hair, and it's the Princess of Navarra. And Berengaria is her name. And I guess that when Richard meets his mother, he is surprised that he has a female he had never seen before close to her when they meet each other in Limassol. And there, for the first time, Richard is presented for the Princess of Navarra. And dear friends, his mother has a very easy way to telling her son about this. This is the Princess of Navarra, and you are going to marry my son. And this was what happened. After some weeks, they married here at Cyprus. I've been talking with several here in the Saladin days, and you have different opinions about where this marriage took place. If it was close to Famagusta or it was in Limassol. I think we just say, especially since we are in the Saladin days, that we can say that it was here at Cyprus. That's absolutely empirically correct, I guarantee that. So they married here, and Princess Berengaria followed the Armada to the Holy Land, and they came to Akka in the coast of the Holy Land, not far from Jerusalem and Haifa, but at the coast, of course, in June 1192. And the first battle, Richard, and at that time, the combined army of crusaders in all European countries won the first battle. And there were only one problem, and that was they had 3,000 prisoners after this. And there were about 25% of them were mothers, and the rest of them were children. And it was a big discussion among the leaders. And Richard was very close to the way of the Pope's thinking, so he thought that it should be any differences between children and older people. So he demanded the army to kill the children and also to kill all the prisoners. This was extremely problematic for example, the French king and the Austrian king. And this ended with this massacre on the children, and it was controversial and had a big influence on the cooperation in this army, the Crusaders' army. I must say this, among the leaders, among the kings and the dukes, this was difficult. But it was the practice. This is also the episode I mentioned now, is also mentioned very in detail by Stephen Renselman, the American historian I mentioned from the 70s, which was often used also in Israel and in the States in the 70s as a very important source. Also in our time he is. Well, every person in Europe, every in this crusade, even this was a massacre and it was controversial, all was sure about one thing. It would only take 1 or 3 months before they had won and killed Saladin and all his supporters and absolutely kill all the infidels, and that they should come back to Europe after they have developed the enormous colonies in North Africa, in the Middle East. But the thing was, I thought this myself. This is the version we have grown up with in my part of the world. But the story is like this. Richard didn't won any more battles than this. He took some citadels, some castles, but he couldn't take cities for a long time. Some cities they took, but then won military, but then often Saladin's army was commanded to go back to give the city or deliver it to the Crusaders. It started a long guerrilla war, and soon Richard understood that this would be impossible. He hadn't no chance to handle the heat. He didn't know how to find fresh water because those who were living there didn't tell them where they could find fresh water. It was the problems increased, and after a half year, the French king went back to Europe, and very aggressive on the man who was in most opposition against Richard, the Duke of Österreich, Leopold, went back. So after a while, after 9 to 10 months, the army was nearly half as big as it was in the beginning when Richard was there. Saladin's reputation was so big even among the Christians. So when Saladin invited the temple knights to come to his castle, they came to Saladin's castle in Jerusalem. Saladin said that you are invited as my guests if you put your swords outside my castle. You can come in and have a banquet and we can discuss. And for Richard, it must have been a shock to see how popular he was, and how big his influence was even about his most trained soldiers and officers. In the end of, we are coming to the end of, after he had been there for a little more than 1 year, Richard escaped. He escaped together with 4 other knights to Europe. Without saying anything to his army, he fled back to Europe, and he was captured outside Vienna, closer to Graz than Vienna, to be exactly. And he was put to prison, and he didn't understand who had captured him, but this was Duke Leopold of Österreich. And at this time, Richard was so unpopular in Europe among the Crusader kings and dukes. So when Duke Leopold understood that this was a time to start an auction. he took him as a prisoner, put him in the castle of Dürrenstein, and started an auction on the head of Richard. I guess that Richard thought that Saladin has captured him when he woke up in the morning in the cellar in the castle. But I guess he was really rather surprised when he saw the face of the Duke of Österreich. But this auction is not a literary element, it's facts. And this auction was, Duke Leopold said that 100,000 mark is the sum we need for giving him, for selling him. And there come a lot of good offers, but happily for Richard, it was his own mother who won this auction, and he was sent alive back to mother, not to London or to England, but to Anjou in France, where mother lived. And the end of Richard's life is not very heroic. It's correct that he went nearly directly to England. He didn't meet Robin Hood, I'm sorry to say, they never met. It's a fiction figure, but he beat John, and he stayed in England for some months and beat John because a lot of the dukes and others in England supported Richard because they thought he was strong and important and nice, and it would be wise to follow him in the future, and he was absolutely the legal king at this time. Well, so in many ways the picture of John, his brother, is correct, I would say, but Richard beat him and went back again to Anjou and stayed for the rest of his life in France. He lived 5 more years, and in these 5 more years of his life, the 5 last years of his life, he was fighting all years against his old friend Philip of France. And they were fighting every year with enormous costs. They fought about Normandy. Only Normandy, this area which where nearly always the whole year is full of fog. But that's another story. So this is the end of Richard's life. He is killed by some gangsters. He did not die in the crusade, in the 4th crusade, but he died when he was fighting against some gangsters outside his castle close to Rouen. That's the end of the very lonesome Richard the Lionheart's life. And I think that this was it's a good element or a good person to write a theater play about. And it's a very pity that Shakespeare didn't know these things we know now, I think. This is the first of what I have thought to say. I haven't forgot the question about the Byzantines. Here in the tourist brochures we were reading at the aeroplane, written by Danes and Englishmen, we hear that Richard fought down, for example, Isaac Comnenus, the Byzantine emperor. And he said in the tourist brochure that he is a crook and a very bad person. And I will not say very much about Isaac Comnenus as a person, but I do not know him very much, but I know a lot of Byzantine emperors. And we must remember now, as we are modern people which have chances to find new sources which have been hidden for us for a lot of 100 years, we must remember one main important thing. The difference between the way they practice Christianity in Rome is totally different from the way they were practicing Christianity in Constantinople. In Rome, they practice Christianity as a fundamentalistic way of thinking Christianity, or who is a believer, who is a Christian believer. If you are, for example, a scientist in our part of the world, the West Europe, you have to ask the bishop, or absolutely the best of all, the Pope, what am I allowed to find out as a scientist? How is it with the things about the sun and the earth? What about the stars? Are we allowed to do something with the body when it's sick? Are we allowed to obducere? When you are... Yeah, say it loud, please. Do you say it loud?
I think dissect is
Yeah. Thank you. This is in our world, in the Western world, absolutely forbidden. In Constantinople, this is allowed. They also allow teachers who are Jews, Muslims, to give lectures at the university. They have university, they have really universities or seminars. And if women find new things about how a heart in a man is functioning, in a human being is functioning, they are allowed to say it and write it. And they can write articles about it, and the articles are in the library in Constantinople. But they are also Christian, but they are Byzantine. And how do you manage to solve this theologically? You say, Vaisal, or the Patriarch of Byzantine or Constantinople says, of course, dear Phyllis, it was a nice thing that you have found out these things about the heart. So God has given you this information. Thank you. It's good for us all. That's the way how they solve it. It's not the Patriarch in Constantinople who has the right to say, this is right, this is wrong, like the Pope does in Rome. This facta, as I told you now, has been the way this has been discussed in the Christianity, also in the Jewish religious milieus, and absolutely also in the Muslim world, in different periods, in different areas. But this is the way this has been solved in the theological questions about these things. Well,
excuse me, didn't Isaac Comnenus have a famous daughter who wrote quite something? I've forgotten her name now.
Yes, now you are mentioning another Comnenus. Alexios Comnenus is the Byzantine emperor in the year of 1099. I'm very happy that you mentioned him. Alexios Komnenos, you can read about him because he is one of the most important Byzantine emperors in good way and bad way. Alexios Komnenos has the same ideas I just told you. In his court, there were Muslims, Jews, every religious believers, and he was very important for science in Constantinople and in the Byzantine Empire. And his patriarch was extremely wise and tolerant towards different things and new foundings in the science. But Alexios Komnenos is very interesting in this perspective of the Crusades, because he was also an extremely politically, tactic and strategic, I would say, cynical person. Because this man, I just told you that Pope Urban II was the man who started the Crusades in 1095. This is the official story, but we are talking about the official story, the story, the history we can see, but this is the hidden. This man, this emperor of the Byzantine Empire, understood that the Byzantine Empire was shrinking, had a lot of enemies, the Arabic world was growing, the Osman were not a state yet, but the Seljuk Turks was stronger and stronger. The battle in 1071, the Byzantine Empire had lost towards the Shia, the Turks, and he was trying to involve the Western Europe, the Western part of the Christianity. How shall we make a propaganda offensive to have help to crush the Turks, or the Seljuk Turks, which are the correct words? Well, I think we shall invite the diplomats of the Pope in Rome and do a spectacular move. The point is that this emperor was the man who convinced the Pope to start the Crusades. And why? Why? The reason was that the Crusades should come through Constantinople and go further into the Anatolia and go against Jerusalem. And he thought mechanically that this army would meet the Seljuk Turks on the way to Jerusalem and crush them and beat them on the way to... That's how cruel politics is and are. I didn't know this until for 11 years ago. I'd been in Istanbul for, at that time, 10 or 15 times. I found this when I was working with a novel called Constantinople about the Norwegian crusader king, Sigurd. Then I understood how Constantinople was built when the Norwegian really Christian fundamentalist Sigurd was going to Constantinople. It was, of course, a big shock for a Christian Norwegian fundamentalist to come to Constantinople, where he should meet his big hero, Alexios Komnenos, who had a big, very great daughter, Anna Komnenos, the intellectual historian Anna Komnenos, who had written 4 volumes translated into English in Penguin Books called the Alexiad. She is an intellectual and a historian, but I tell you, she was so fascinated seeing all these wonderful Nordic crusaders, beautiful men coming to Constantinople, and she has written very poetically.
It's an Oxford Dawn.
Yes.
Recently, yeah.
So, but this is also showing the complexity in the Byzantine Empire, which has had an enormous influence on Cyprus, but also in Norway, on Norway. 400 years of our history is very, very linked to how the Byzantine Empire was constructed. And I think that one of the biggest losses in Europe is that we know so extremely little about the Byzantine Empire. How about the politics? In the northern parts of Europe, it's nearly nothing. In Norway, we have no institute working with Byzantine history, but in 400 years, it had influenced us a lot. For example, the Viking period is a period it's the same period as when the Byzantine Empire was at its strongest and most important.
They suffered also the propaganda war taken by many of the Crusaders out back home to France and England, saying how tricky these Byzantine people were. The result is that Byzantine is a kind of a negative adjective in English now, meaning kind of sneaky and Eastern and duplicitous and so on.
My new friend from North Ireland here is mentioning one important thing, is that because the thing I just have told you about, the differences between the West and East of the Christianity. We are at universities and schools grown up in the Western parts with hearing that the Byzantine Empire is sneaky, unbeliever, they are not believing enough, and the most horrible thing they have done is that they have been accepting Muslims and Jews to live together with them. That's, from my point of view, that's the most horrible thing you can do for many hundred years in the Western or the part of the Christianity we live in the Western parts of Europe. And therefore we know so little about this Byzantine area. Yes, this was a long breakfast, but cheers. Yes?
That was a very useful and brilliant presentation. I found out so many things about Richard that I didn't know, and thank you for that. The episode involving Cyprus is being taught at schools here. I was taught the episode at school, and I'm going to narrate it to you.
Yes.
And please forgive inaccuracies because I'm not a historian, but it's a fascinating story which basically says that the ship carrying Berengaria and Richard's sister, not his mother, shipwrecked outside Limassol, and Cyprus Komnenos had the brilliant idea of taking the two women hostage and asking for ransom, and that resulted in Richard turning back and chasing the Cyprus Komnenos all the way to the mountain range here, to Kandara, and then having taken Cyprus from his Cyprus Komnenos, passed it on to the Knights Templars, who then passed it on to the Lusignan, who then passed it on to the Venetians, who lost it to the Ottomans, and then the British arrived, and here we are.
Can I say before you respond, I think the only thing that we agree in our histories seem to be on this.
This story.
It was at the age of 9 or 10 when I was told this story. It was exactly the same story. And I'm glad it was only when I was 9 that I didn't have the intelligence or the analysis that I can do now to believe it. But it was like a fairy tale.
And it's part of the mythology of Cyprus that we sell to tourists, that she was kept at the castle as a prisoner at the castle in Limassol. She got married at the castle with Richard in Limassol.
Can I say that Shakespeare? Oh, sorry.
I also thought of Isagios Komnenos when you mentioned Alexios Komnenos, who was the governor of Cyprus in the Byzantine Empire. I remember him as the only figure we learned in Byzantine Cypriot history that Cypriots united to kick him away. And that's part of the stability that allowed Richard to take over Cyprus afterwards. And the other thing I remember...
Maybe they didn't teach us that by that time they wanted us to be
maybe I don't remember accurately, so I was a bit not sure whether I should refer to it or not. But I will go back to another point, the one you closed the discussion with, that in Western Europe you don't talk enough, you don't learn enough Byzantine history. Well, in Southeastern Europe, we honestly don't learn enough Western European history. And the way I see it, after all this beautiful historical and mythological, to some extent, analysis today, it's probably one of the things as Europeans or Southeastern Europeans and Western Europeans, whatever we want to name it, we have to reconsider very much how we approach history education, because we live the effects of what has happened then even nowadays. The speech of the Pope, if the BBC put it with a title that somebody else did it nowadays, it would fit perfectly. So I think that we never paid enough attention to how, although that is 1,000 years of history, it actually affects us nowadays, because in the history of humanity it's nothing, right? So I am actually glad to see that I always felt a bit offended by my educational system that it didn't teach me a global aspect of history, but apparently it's a more general problem we have to look into with regards to education.
Thank you very much. I must also mention something which I think is very interesting for us all, is that in Istanbul there is a fantastic Swedish General Consulate, a Swedish institute, which was the former Norwegian-Swedish embassy in the Ottoman Empire. There is a very interesting institute. I hope you can come there and see the fantastic articles they have, and well, tell them that you know me. Go there. For many years, from the middle of the 90s, I have been giving lectures there about their own Byzantine history. And one of the most important experiences for me is that in Turkey they don't learn nearly nothing about Byzantine history. And for example, Viran Pamuk has mentioned this many times. He has studied at the Galatasaray Gymnasium and Galatasaray University and had heard nothing. He thought that the Byzantine Empire was synonymous to men with long black shirts and a grey beard. And that was the Byzantine. And he has mentioned this, for example, in his Istanbul book. The point is that even it's impossible to understand the Ottoman Empire's history, especially the first 100 years, without understanding the Byzantine history, because the Ottoman Empire is in all ways built on the Byzantine Empire. That was their
Foundation.
Yeah, foundation. Even the castle, the Topkapi castle, is built on the Byzantine castle. And when Mehmet, the second emperor, won Constantinople, 1453, he immediately decided, as we have to remember how the Byzantine built this enormous pluralistic imperium. And they wanted to choose a new state religion. Constantinople chose Christianity. We have, the Christianity is totally, it's impossible to talk anymore about Christianity because of the things which happened in 1204. And now we will have a state religion, but it's important, since we have an imperium, to allow the Jews and the Christian minorities to use their religion and allow them to practice their religion. Or if we don't do this, it's impossible to be effective rulers of this imperium. This is very important, and from the day one, he sent people to Europe, to Holland, to Italy, to develop the Ottoman Empire. This is controversial to say it, but once more, this is facts. It's very important to understand how many things which are the same in both these imperiums.
But then the Ottoman Empire started to go backwards, did it not? Instead of welcoming Greek philosophy and culture, for example, there was bans against science. I understand the late 17th century, at a time when England had gone into reverse. If you look at Shakespeare, for example, and the portrayal of Shylock, the Merchant of Venice, a play that in many ways is anti-Semitic, but in other ways is philo-Semitic, where Shylock's given fantastic speeches to talk about the suffering of Jews. And of course, 40 years after Shakespeare dies, Cromwell allows the Jews back into England. And of course, after that, then there's a flourishing of science, you could argue, the beginning of the British Empire. But a modern empire, actually, pro-science and pro-innovation, which is different when the Ottomans were going backwards, England and empire-wise was going forwards, and perhaps not such a bad thing as all that.
Okay, I will say one more thing. Now I will say that breakfast time we go nearly over to a lunch, and then someone else has to sit here. But I will say one more thing, which I hope I can involve you in to the future, because I'm cooperating with Norwegian academics, writers in Norway, but also abroad. Italy, Koç University, Istanbul, in Rome, and elsewhere. We are nowadays starting to building a Constantinople University. And this is not a building. We want to, because in 1204, the Fourth Crusade, where Saladin and Richard were not involved. They died some years before. But the Venice-led Fourth Crusade, and they were also here, we can see it everywhere. One of the most cruel crusaders of all, the Venetians, they led the Fourth Crusade, and they said they should go to Jerusalem, but they went to Constantinople, to the Christian brothers and sisters, but since they were only Byzantines, they were infidels, of course, and unbelievers, so the Fourth Crusade killed as many as they could in the church, the 38 main churches in Constantinople. They burned down all the libraries, which were at that time the best in the world, and they destroyed the universities and the seminars, and everything was burned and crossed. And from my point of view, this is one of the main reasons why we know so little about these things. Well, we will try to start a network, both physically, that we invite people to give lectures, but also develop this in internet. And we will not have a big bureaucracy, but we will develop this, because this is a sort of a lack of knowledge which we have to do something about. You must do this. It's impossible to understand the Viking area in Norway without understanding something about the Byzantine history and their development. But I will just mention this, so I hope we will keep in touch in the future. I will, the house here, which is 5 years today, I heard, will be in contact with me and my friends in the future, and so I insist and hope that you will keep the contact with this house in the future, and then we will go further. thank you, and I would say good night.